Italy is proud to have ratified ILO Convention 190 on the elimination of violence and harassment at workplace. Protecting women and men at work is more important than ever, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, during which many forms of work-related violence and harassment have unfortunately increased. Protecting workers at work also involves protecting them on their way to work. For many, particularly women, the journey from home to work is often unsafe. Italy is committed to ensuring measures are taken at the national level to tackle work-related violence and harassment. Historically, Italy has always been a frontline advocate at the UN for the protection of women's rights. In the current phase, this is even more crucial. If we do not consider women as essential to the recovery, we will not be able to emerge from the crisis stronger. Together, during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, we stand with the ILO in calling on all governments to ratify Convention 190.
Preventing and eliminating violence against women and girls is one of those major objectives which require full mobilization of efforts, steadiness of approach, and decisive and multidimensional action. It is fundamentally a human rights issue, but it is also a political, socio-economic, and cultural endeavor. It demands the use of a wide range of policies and instruments, but also a collective mindset switch in terms of education, social practices, and communication. Right after Italy's ratification of the Istanbul Convention in 2013, the Italian Parliament enacted a landmark law to tackle gender-based violence, which produced also a strategic national plan with multiple lines of action. Although much remains to be done, the path is clearly and irreversibly marked. We also have to be aware that this is an intergenerational challenge, meaning that we owe to future generations a world without gender-based violence. And at the same time, we need to learn, with the contribution of the youth, how to behave differently and how to effectively devise a non-discriminatory and violence-free world. So let's orange the world more and more all together here at UN and in each and every one of our countries.
During these days, we are focusing our attention on the problem of gender-based violence. Unfortunately, we still have to. The number of cases is increasing, and this is a failure of society as a whole. Next year, Italy will start its 3-year term at the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, ECOSOC, and we will strive to make sure that this problem will be taken care adequately, also by carrying out important initiatives and for the solution of this issue.
Over the last 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, each of us, from our own perspective, highlighted the importance of this campaign. Tackling gender-based violence is all the more urgent as COVID-19 has exacerbated inequalities and increased the risk factors contributing to violence against women and girls, especially domestic and intimate partner violence. We need comprehensive approaches based on prevention and strengthened social protection. Education is key as it helps build resilient, peaceful societies. Open and full access to health services, including sexual and reproductive health, is essential to assist women and girls who are victims of violence. By the same token, access to justice and redress for the victims, along with accountability for the perpetrators, is imperative. We need to strengthen a partnership with civil society, as local organizations are often the first point of contact for abused women and girls. We must raise awareness and engage men and boys as allies and agents of change, as only through their active involvement can we overthrow toxic masculinity and stereotyped gender roles. We need to promote the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in all aspects of society and decision-making, and expand their economic opportunities. More financing and better policies are therefore needed to eliminate violence and achieve a gender transformative society. These ideas are at the core of Italy's national gender equality strategy. They have been mainstreamed throughout the entire program of our G20 presidency, and they are a pillar of our daily action at the United Nations. Italy is a member of the UN Group of Friends for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. We committed to the Action Coalition on Violence within the Generation Equality Initiative. We are a staunch supporter of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and we actively promote the role of women mediators and women peacekeepers. We all need to do more to end the scourge of gender-based violence. We are ready. Are you?
The need for sustained and concerted action on gender and small arms control has never been clearer than during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is having a deeply regressive effect on gender-based violence. Thanks to a collective effort strongly supported by Italy, together with all its EU and Latin American partners and a broader membership, last July, the 7th biennial meeting of the parties of the Programme of Action to combat the illicit trade of small arms and light weapons reached an historic achievement, finally agreeing to progressive and constructive language addressing the connections between gender and small arms. States are now called to proactively implement a gender-sensitive approach to small arms and light weapons control by acknowledging the greater impact of armed violence on women, girls, and children.
When it comes to peacekeeping, during our mandate on the UN Security Council, we promoted the inclusion of specific provisions to prevent and counter gender-based violence and sexual exploitation and abuse in the mandates of peacekeeping missions. To this regard, we initiated Resolution 2382 in 2017, which reaffirms the indispensable role of women in peacekeeping, and we constantly advocated for a stronger women's presence in the UN missions. On this, though, we should all do more. It is not a matter of political correctness. Women make peacekeeping operations more effective. Italy believes in the benefits provided by the presence of well-integrated female personnel in peacekeeping operations, as they have proven to be extremely successful in accessing communities and creating relationships of trust with local populations. This is especially true with regard to the most vulnerable categories, women, children, and elders, who are often the main victims of violence and conflicts.
Gender parity at the United Nations, gender equality and empowerment of women, zero tolerance against sexual exploitation and abuse, a more prominent role for women in peacekeeping. For Italy, these values represent a key set of goals also in the Fifth Committee, which is the Committee of the General Assembly for Budgetary and Administrative Matters. Italy spares no effort, together with its European partners, to ensure that every policy related to women is adequately funded and is fully implemented by the United Nations.
Climate change is affecting all of us. However, women and girls living in developing countries are particularly affected by the environmental, economic, and social consequences of rising temperatures and extreme weather events. This was rightly pointed out in the Youth for Climate Manifesto, a forward-looking document redacted by 400 youth representatives that gathered in Milan on the margins of the pre-COP. Italy fully supports the engagement of young women in international climate negotiations to promote women empowerment and intergenerational equity.
Women's rights and women empowerment stand at the very core of our communication strategy. This applies to our social media accounts, to our podcast, and to our public diplomacy events and initiatives. For example, Italy is proud to be a partner of many advocacy campaigns of UN Women, UNFPA, ILO, and other UN entities that speak out loudly against gender-based violence. During the Orange the World campaign this year, we are publishing on each of the 16 days of the campaign for the activism against gender-based violence a video message of a different staff member here at Italy's mission to the UN. The aim of this project is to show how women's rights is a cross-cutting issue that is relevant to all, no matter what thematic they cover, from climate to disarmament, from budgetary issues to crime prevention.
Italy has a long-standing partnership with African countries and UN entities operating in Africa for women's rights. Female genital mutilation is a harmful practice widespread in Africa. Just to give you an example, about 98% of Somali women have experienced this practice. We have been working hand in hand with African institutions and civil society to create a legal framework to eradicate FGM. We succeeded in adopting a UN General Assembly resolution that clearly states that FGM is a violation of human rights that cannot be justified by cultural or traditional exceptions. Lastly, as one of the main donors of programs aiming to eradicate FGM, we made the cause a priority of our membership in the Human Rights Council.
The human rights situation in Afghanistan is becoming deeply concerning for women and girls. Their access to education and their participation in the economic and political sphere has been restricted by the Taliban, and their life is now exposed to increasing risks and limitations. This is in stark contrast with the results achieved over the last 20 years, when, just to give you an example, women's literacy rate has tripled. Over the last 20 years, Italy promoted projects for women empowerment, girl access to health and education, and the campaign against sexual and gender-based violence. Preserving these progresses is a key priority for our country. That is why we organize an event on the sideline of the high-level week of the UN General Assembly to support Afghan women access to education. Education is an enabling factor for women empowerment and a driver of sustainable peace and inclusive growth. Failing to invest in girl education will have a deep negative impact on the already fragile Afghan economy. A UN report estimated that restricting women from working will cost Afghanistan 5% of its GDP. Afghan women and girls deserve to live in safety and security and dignity and to exploit their full potential. Italy will continue to work to uphold their rights, including the right to learn and to work.
From a humanitarian perspective, gender-based violence is not just another form of violence. It's a human rights and protection issue deeply rooted in gender inequalities. Natural disasters and human-made crises are not gender neutral. They have a disproportionate impact on women and girls. Italy is strongly committed to combating all forms of violence, and this is why we proudly joined the call to action on protection from gender-based violence in emergencies. The aim is to drive change and foster accountability so that every humanitarian effort from the earliest stage of a crisis includes mechanisms to mitigate gender-based violence and to provide safe and comprehensive services to those affected by gender-based violence. Ending gender-based violence in humanitarian emergencies is not only a top priority for Italy and the UN, but it's also a moral imperative.
Women's meaningful participation in the economy, politics, peace and security processes is linked to greater economic growth, a decrease in human rights abuses, and sustainable peace. In recent years, many countries have increasingly focused on gender equality as a domestic and foreign policy priority. Italy is among them. In the framework of its G20 presidency, Italy hosted the first G20 conference on women's empowerment. Last week, the Italian Council of Ministers approved a package of new measures to ensure greater protection to women. Recently, the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs adopted specific regulations to achieve gender parity in the workplace. Changing the legal framework is key to advancing equality. This framework alone, however, is not enough for changing the status of women. We also need a change in cultural norms. Often unspoken, these norms shape social standards and are a strong influence on individual behavior, including the use of violence. To achieve lasting change, we must challenge the stereotypes, beliefs, behaviors, and traditions that condone any form of physical or psychological violence against women. Culture is not tied to stable patterns, rather to dynamic ones. Traditions actually shift and change under changing social and political landscapes. Let's not forget it, and let's make it possible for women to obtain full access to education, jobs, and fair treatment.
COVID-19 has deteriorated progress toward gender equality and women's empowerment. For this reason, Italy is stepping up its efforts with the United Nations in order to achieve SDG 5 worldwide, We are working in partnership with entities like UN Women, UNFPA, and UNICEF in order to provide access to health, education, social services, and women's empowerment in the most vulnerable countries. Italy is a major donor to programs such as the fight against female genital mutilation and early childhood marriages in order to ensure a future for all women and girls in their society.
Italy is very proud to promote in the General Assembly of the United Nations an annual resolution on the United Nations Programme on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. One of the most prominent elements in this resolution is the fight against all forms of crimes against women and girls. Last year, in 2020, Italy promoted in the framework of this resolution new provisions on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the increase of violence against women and girls and their increasing obstacles to access to justice. Italy will continue in these efforts, it will strengthen them, it will redouble them as one of our top priorities in our action here at the United Nations.
The problem of the violence against women and girls is a topic of the utmost importance at the United Nations, as testified in several resolutions that Italy, along with the membership, has negotiated here in New York during the session of the General Assembly. I can refer to the Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, but above all to the political declaration adopted by mutual consent a few days ago at the high-level meeting of the appraisal of the implementation of the Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons. The document recognizes violence against women and girls as a serious crime and a grave offense to human dignity and physical integrity, a violation and abuse of human rights.